Today on Earth Focus, Indigenous voices on climate change and what it means for the future. Coming up on Earth Focus.
I think the climate change has changed the land tremendously.
Every day we are faced with climate change, and it's unfortunate to our people and to our land because we are people of the land.
Where I come from, my family line is we live off of the earth. We live from the ocean and the land.
Because of all the destruction, it's making it difficult for other, the animals in our ecosystem to survive.
We're here to talk about climate change because we're seeing it affect our crops. And so it's not just food security for traditional resources, this is a food security issue for the planet.
If we lose our environment, the type of lifestyle that I live it'll be obsolete.
Well, a lot of people talk about climate change, and it's very interesting because, at least on Guam, we think about it a little differently than everybody else does. We like to think about it in terms of global climate variability rather than change, because we really can't predict what's going to happen or what's going on. And it's been that way on Guam pretty much for the last 4 or 5 years, where we can't predict what used to be very predictable. Even our seasons we can't predict anymore.
I wanted to go back to Guam and become an organic farmer. Oil prices are high, and they're going to be getting higher, and food is going to be getting harder and harder to ship to Guam. And as of now, most of our food is imported. So if we can gain the independence and take our food systems back, then we'll be able to thrive as a people and not depend on oil, and hence reduce, or at least try to limit our footprint on the planet, which would help with climate change.
Basically what I see right now is I'm a hunter and a fisherman as well, and one of the things I like to do is I like to go coconut crabbing. In Chamorro we call it a zuzu. It's a type of crab that gets spawned in the ocean and then it goes on land to grow. What I'm finding is because it's getting hotter, the climate is changing, we have a lot of the native forest there, it's depleting. So for example, when I was younger, certain areas that I would go to hunt the coconut crab, it would be lush, it would be green, and it would be moist. Now these areas, most of them, they're dry, a lot of the trees are gone, and the coconut crabs are no longer there. They're being forced into smaller areas. And that's kind of not good in a way, because if they're not spread out throughout the island, it's easier to deplete that resource quicker. So that's one of the things that concerns me, is we might not have these habitats for certain animals that we have.
One of the main things that we need to do is we need to start taking a more active approach in restoring our environment.
An interesting thing is when people say, I want to give my kids the best. And you hear it all the time. You hear, mothers and fathers say the same thing. I want to give my kids the best. I want them to go to school. I want them to have opportunities. But the opportunities that we think they will have are in terms of money, in terms of economy. And those things are what drive global warming or climate change. And so, to me, if you say, I want what's best for my daughter or son, then do what's best for our daughters and sons.
Guam, our population is a little over 200,000. That's kind of a little dent compared to other places, like especially here in the States, where it's no comparison, our population on our little island versus the whole United States as a whole. I think we need to come together collaboratively, the whole world together. We need to come together and we need to say we are all involved with this. We all are making our own dent in this, and we all need to contribute equally to make sure that we get this thing squared away. Because it won't work if, for example, we, on one side of the world, we say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to change our lifestyle, we're going to start to be more eco-friendly, And then the other side says, no, we're not going to do nothing. We're going 2 steps forward and 4 steps back, so it's not really doing anything. We're just, we call that in our island playing the cha-cha. You move forward, you move back, you move forward, you move back. You're not going anywhere.
Climate change is inevitable. It's been occurring for thousands of years on our islands. We've been able to adapt to it. Unfortunately, though, things like development and things on the shoreline have minimized our abilities to adapt to it. So the climate change effects, rising sea, longer droughts, things like that, because development had been such a priority on our islands, it's minimized our ability to adapt and move and be able to have a different habitat. So we're feeling the effects of climate change, maybe not the climate itself directly, but definitely the abilities to move and readjust our traditional ways.
Where I live, there's an island in the middle of the Kaneohe Bay that's called Ahu'ulaka, but to everyone else they refer that as the sandbar. When my father was alive, he always told us, and I remember when I was little, at the highest tide you could see the sand island. Today, at the lowest tide, lucky we see the sand island.
Next generation is going to have a lot of challenges. If we don't come up to be good stewards or really try to respect climate change, because I think the debate that we have isn't so much about climate change, but the causes of it. And if we can understand and respect climate change and not have a fear about it, we might be able to understand it a little better and then have a humble approach on the things that we need to improve so our next generation won't be left with the mess that maybe we create or don't create for them.
We always thought of 7 years, the 7 years ahead of us. We planned for 7 years ahead of us. So I think if everybody thought that way, and not just thinking about the money part, but plan on how your grandchildren are going to survive on this earth 7 generations from now.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I'll just say 2006, we had a drought where normally Makade's weekend is the last weekend of August, and sometimes we can predict rain on Sunday. The last day of Makade's, we usually have rain. It's a beautiful weekend, and it just seems like that's been a trend that I can remember. But what was really disturbing to us is that being a surface water dependent municipality services that we have, and the Suyez watershed, we didn't receive rain in that late summer until the end of October. And so the water supply to our community was down at ultimate lows. It was such an emergency that we received emergency assistance from the governor and Congressman Norm Dix, all pulled strings to get a desalination unit to give us a baseline water supply while we still used water conservation principles. But the scariest thing, I think, for us is that we were able to adapt to that immediate crisis. But Mother Nature was going to dictate whether there'd be enough water in the Suyez to allow those fish to go upstream. And our biologists and our partners in Fish and Wildlife were very uncertain to the viability of the eggs in the returning hens for that particular run. And so if we see the shift of the Pineapple Express, it's a routine thing that sometimes fluctuates where it hits the continent. But if we see different changes and we see these things happening, how are we going to be able to predict? And so the survival of one of our most important river systems, is very uncertain.
Well, over the last 20 years, it's been quite significant. Well, we began to notice it primarily because the northern first seal, breed on St. George and St. Paul Island. And we began to notice the steep declines in populations on both St. Paul and St. George. The grounds they once covered were quite large for the herds to breed on and rear their young on St. George and St. Paul. Nowadays, it takes up very little space. So we began to recognize that something is going wrong within that environment or that ecosystem, and that we needed to draw attention to it. So in the last 10 years, we've been really aggressive trying to get our government, the United States government, and the state of Alaska government to pay attention to what's affecting the population of seals and seabirds. And a lot of it, we believed, had to do not only with global warming and the warming of the Bering Sea, but also had to do with the prey species not being present where they used to be. So the fur seal populations and the seabird populations, they've got to thrive, and the prey species that they depend on are not longer available, and a lot of that has to do also with overfishing.
My short 59 years on Earth at home, I have seen receding of ice in the rivers. The ice is thinner by every year, and also there has been lack of snow on the tundra and in our rivers. These issues that are affecting our daily lives, and it's affecting our hunting patterns, it's affecting our animals, and it's affecting our fish, and that is what we're observing. And unless there's erosion control measures to protect the erosion, we're going to continue to erode. And in the next 50 years, the prediction is that 85% of the villages along the rivers and the coast have to be moved because they are going to be underwater.
Last year we submitted a request to Dr. Jane Lubachenko of NOAA to help us create MPA, or Marine Protected Area, around St. George. And so we're beginning to work on that process so we can protect those waters and give it a rest. People like to say the Bering Sea is suffering a heart attack. Well, how does a heart attack victim regain health? They rest. So the ocean must be just like us, since our blood and the seawater are almost similar. The ocean needs to rest. And so we're requesting our government to help us give that ocean a rest so that the seal populations, the seabird populations, and the human population can rebuild.
Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.